All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Hey everyone, Jody here. It is hard to believe, but we are already into holiday season for 2021. So over the next month or so, we're going to keep doing new shows, and we've also got some really cool end-of-year specials planned. One thing we're going to do is take a couple episodes and follow up on a bunch of tidbits from stories that we covered throughout the year. So if you have something you want us to follow up on, big or small, get in touch. We're also going to give ourselves, the whole team here, a little bit of time off. And so during those stretches, we will run back some of our favorite conversations from the year. So that's what we're going to do this week, Thanksgiving week, and then we'll be back with new episodes the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. We hope you have a great Thanksgiving, that you travel and stay safe and get to spend some time with friends and loved ones. And by the way, if any of those friends or loved ones say, hey, you got any podcast recommendations? You know what to do. Okay, let's get into it. Here's one of our favorite episodes from 2021. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, July 27th, 1967, President Lyndon B. Johnson establishes the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, also known as the Kerner Commission after its chair, Governor Kerner of Illinois. This commission is in response to what's known as the long, hot summer of 1967, a summer marked by rioting, violence, civil unrest, protest, much of it on behalf of and by Black and Latino communities in major cities around the country. There, of course, had been riots in Watts in 1965, Chicago 66, Newark 67, lots of unrest going on in this era. And there were riots in Detroit as the commission first gathered to meet. So, we will get into all of this, but I will say that the Kerner Commission's results are notable for one, how frankly they painted a picture of why Black and brown communities were frustrated, and two, how quickly its findings were generally buried and spun and in many ways lost to history. But not entirely lost to history, because we are talking about it today. But more importantly, there is a new release of the Kerner Commission report, and included in there some writing on some lessons for today. And it is put together by Jelani Cobb, staff writer at the New Yorker, professor at Columbia Journalism School, and our special guest here today. So Jelani, welcome to the show. We've been wanting to have you on for a while, so thanks for doing this.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And, of course, I'm joined, as always, by Nicole Hammer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hey there. Hello, Jody.
So, Jelani, I hinted a little bit at that timeline of how this commission comes together. Johnson convenes it in the summer of 67, riots still going on in parts of the country. We're having such a fierce debate right now about commissions and attempts to sort of reckon with this era. And a lot of it is about these things getting dragged out and stuff not coming together. So, in terms of just that timing, I mean, does LBJ deserve any credit for this happening sort of quickly and in the moment?
Yeah, I mean, he does. I mean, so I think that, LBJ has to grow up in public, on matters of race in a way that very few presidents have had to do. I think that probably people compare LBJ to Lincoln all the time. but Lincoln really had to grapple with deciphering the riddle of race, and all of his mistakes would be laid bare, for the historical record. The things that he got right and the things that he got wrong, we'd recognize. I think the same thing goes for LBJ. And so the fact that he creates the commission in the first place, the fact that it comes together, the fact that it doesn't, to his credit, given the kind of political operator that he was, he didn't appoint a set of political puppets who were going to just be his handpicked people who would deliver the report that he wanted. As a matter of fact, the report kind of got away from him, and that was part of the reason that those findings never really went anywhere in the administration. And so I think he does deserve credit for trying to grapple with the problem, even if he got more than he anticipated in terms of their response to it.
Yeah, I am so curious about the people who were on this commission and how they came to their conclusions. Because you think about something like the Moynihan Report, which had come out just a few years earlier, and you could imagine the Kerner Commission coming out with something like that, something that says, this is a result of Black pathology and Black culture, and Black people really need to focus on fixing themselves and their communities. But the Kerner Commission is so different from that. I mean, how did they wind up somewhere so progressive and so frank about racism in the U.S.?
Yeah. So the other thing, another couple dynamics here, there are 12 people on the commission. 10 of the 12 people are white. These are very much, it's bipartisan, but these are very much people who are in the kind of center of the political spectrum. They're Republicans and Democrats. The two Black people are Roy Wilkins, who was the executive secretary of the NAACP at that time, and Edward Brooke, senator, who was the Black senator who was elected in Massachusetts. And so, we have these two African Americans, but they're not, and Edward Brooke is very much a moderate. People would even consider conservative on these matters. They didn't have H. Rap Brown in these meetings. But what happens is, I think the thing that the commission did was ask the fundamental questions. They didn't go to just the superficial concerns. So there's a whole section of that commission report that delves into the history of Black people in the United States. I mean, going back to the colonial era and walking through up to the 1960s. So when there are Black people who are angry in these cities, they're asking fundamentally, how did they even get to these cities? And how did the conditions that they're angry about arise? Now, there are some overtones of Moynihan in that report, if you kind of dig deep enough in there, particularly when they talk about what the impact of poverty and joblessness and so on have been when on family structure. They skew, you can tell that there's a kind of Moynihan skew in their writing. But I think it's the delving into the more fundamental questions that send them further and further to the left.
Can I just, I want to quote a passage, probably the best known passage from the report, that says, "Our nation is moving toward two societies, one Black, one white, separate and unequal." And then the report goes on to say, "What white Americans have never fully understood, but what the Negro can never forget, is that the white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it." And that to me is so powerful, especially for when it was written, because it really lays bare, like, this is not a Black people problem. This is actually a white supremacist problem. And we need to be honest about where responsibility and where accountability lies, and how so many white Americans, if not have condoned, have definitely been complicit in how this system maintains itself.
So, I mean, I think that being the power graph that people pull out and discuss, had as much to do with that report being buried as anything else. I mean, we're still having debate. If that report came out today, they would say it was critical race theory and they would ban it.
Yes.
You can say this right now.
Right.
Right.
Because we're talking about culpability and complicity. And those are things that are not easy discussions in American society, especially as it relates to race. We're more invested in a kind of absolution and, the kind of waivers of innocence that leave us to say that these are problems, like to the Moynihan analysis, these are problems that were self-inflicted, et cetera. And so there's that. The other part of it is, what makes it such a stark departure is that the standard boilerplate rhetoric among liberals of the 1960s, people who were in favor of the civil rights movement and civil rights legislation, was that America's values were fundamentally sound, but Black people had just been an oversight, that, we'd failed to live up to our values. We're generally egalitarian, but we have to actually be what we say that we are, and so on. But in saying that white society condones it, that really had a different implication.
Let's talk about a few of the other findings of the report, and then a little bit more about the legacy and the way it's maybe been lost to history in some ways. But, I'm curious about the balance between racial lens, a picture of race relations in this country, and what seems to be a very sort of stark economic lens and assessment. In particular, there's passages about, immigrant communities who came to this country and rose from poverty, and those being largely helped by the industrialization in this country, and then Black communities trying to do the same thing, really suffering from deindustrialization. I mean, that's a very sort of economic and class lens that's pretty striking to me.
Yeah, and so, first of one of the other things about Kerner that remains notable is the breadth of the analysis. Because in addition to doing that, they also analyzed media, which virtually no one was doing, and issued this call for media to diversify and to change the way that it covers these communities, what they called then ghetto communities, et cetera. But on the issue of the comparison with immigrants, one of the things that happens, I think, is that all the representatives are indicted in some way, shape, or form. The political system does not respond to the needs of these communities. There are a bunch of elected officials who are on this commission. Labor unions, which is so key to the development of the middle class, particularly among people who had been immigrants and the children of immigrants, are by and large exclusionary, for most of the first half of the 20th century as it relates to African Americans and their representatives of labor, on this commission. The employment and hiring, all these things that, everyone gets some share of the blame, the culpability in the process of doing this. And so they look at the particularities, the kind of asterisk that's next to Black identity, and how class and racism conflate into this kind of toxic symbiosis as it relates to the condition of Black people in the country. And really, last thing I'll say about this is that, we talked about Moynihan and kind of the shadow of Moynihan as they were writing this, but I really think that my kind of theory about this is that they were trying to replicate the impact that American Dilemma had 20 years earlier. Gunnar Myrdal's study of race in the United States really sets the benchmark and creates the kind of mandate for Cold War liberalism. And I think they thought they could reinvent the wheel with that. Lightning could strike twice. But they were in a very different political moment. And, one of the reasons that we can see all the changes and developments that we might attribute to American Dilemma, but the legacy of Kerner has been missed opportunity after missed opportunity.
So let's start to paint a picture of how this report gets received. And I don't know if buried is the right word, but let's start with Johnson himself. I think he maybe got, as you said, more than he bargained for. They also take a couple swipes at Johnson, and he'd floated ideas that there were communists who were agitating for these riots, and they're like, nah, not so much. So what is his reaction, and then how does that reflect the kind of larger, despite its popularity, the larger way in which this is received?
Yeah, I mean, and so the idea, one of the first things that indicates that this commission has gotten away from him. And, there's the old saying, not that these people were puppets, none of them were puppets, but there's the old political saying that's very useful, always beware of puppets that begin pulling their own strings. And so the kind of parallel would be always beware of commissions that begin thinking for themselves. And so around the question with the communist infiltration or communist provocation, which would have been great, useful propaganda, for the White House. And the commission is like, no, the problem is not the Soviet Union. The problem is us. And that's a very different kind of undertaking. And so, the report comes out to this gangbusters response in terms of publishing and purchasing, but a very tepid response in the administration. And it's shelved almost immediately. LBJ doesn't make any real significant acknowledgement of the findings. And it just is this thing that happened.
Just to draw a line under that point about popularity, this sold 1 million copies in the first week.
It's crazy.
That's...
We have 3 academic authors here who are all going, oh my God.
Yeah, there's so much of the report that requires this reckoning, not just recognition, but reckoning, and people's unwillingness, I think, to deal with that sent a huge message that, okay, well, if this requires funds, if this requires actions, no, this is not a solution. and people move on very quickly.
One of the interesting things about this report, which is that I had read smaller revised versions of it. Our version that we're putting out was intended for undergrad courses. So it's the essential Kerner. We tried to distill it down to the most relevant points and the most enduring points. But having read the entire sprawling 900-page manuscript, what was really rewarding was combing through the footnotes, as everyone knows, that's where the real information is. But one of the things, I was working late at night, and I just read this footnote and burst out laughing, like I had lost it, because it was so completely crazy. The commission had a footnote in one chapter acknowledging everyone who had been very helpful to their fact finding, and so they thanked one particular officer in the LAPD for his insight into the dynamics of riot policing and the most effective ways of doing community-based riot policing to create safety for all involved, the officers and the community members. And so they gave a special acknowledgement and debt of gratitude to, I think it was Captain at the time, Daryl Gates.
Of course.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Wow.
And of course, by 1992, Ice Cube is talking about Daryl Gates. The whole city of Los Angeles is on fire. That just kind of leaped out to me. It's like this dude who you're thanking for his insights into riot policing will eventually sponsor the largest riot in response to police violence in the history of the entire country.
Well,
That's amazing.
it's like there's a whole story of not learning lessons to begin with, but I feel like so much of the American story is also unlearning lessons that you at one point did learn, and possibly willfully unlearning them, So, yeah. So as we wrap up, I'm curious if there's any sort of tidbit or smaller piece. That footnote story is great, but I do want to give a shout out to Farai Shadea, who has been on this show as a former colleague, but she has been championing the media lessons in the Kerner Report. And throughout this past year, as media has been having a reckoning, she's been saying, there was this thing in 1968 that we may want to look to. So are there other smaller, maybe more overlooked parts of the Kerner Report that you feel like really resonate today?
Yes. I also have to shout out to Matthew Gariglia, who I had the pleasure of having as a grad student when I was on faculty at UConn, and now kind of full blossomed historian in his own right. And he helped tremendously with editing this project. And we had a conversation about, we were working on one section last year, and we were going over this paragraph where they were talking about police-community relations. And, they said that the ghetto, which is the term they were using, that ghetto is over-policed. And they said that police were being used for every sort of concern in these communities. And that there really needed to be a alternate system of social resources that would respond in lieu of law enforcement. And they said that when you have law enforcement responding to particular problems that don't require law enforcement, you dramatically increase the likelihood that something will go awry. And half a century later, the same arguments were being made under the banner of defund police.
Did the report say and one day there will be these things called Karens, and they will call, the prescience here is it's remarkable.
That's a different footnote.
They didn't get the exact name, but they got the description. They were talking about this, and they really kind of nailed it. This essential problem. I mean, it was also interesting because when defund the police came out as an idea, it was a staple of the left, the progressive left, but it had been articulated by people who were straight, middle, moderate centrists in 1968. And so that may say something about where our political dialogue has gone, that a middle of the road liberal idea is now considered really radical.
All right. Well, we will leave it there. There's so much more we could do, but please go out and read this report, especially the new version, which is the work of Jelani Cobb and his colleagues. So, Jelani, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
And Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
You need money to hire people and put them to work. And unless you get that kind of money, it just can't be done. I just don't think that Congress recognizes, or it has not been brought home to them severely enough as to what the real problem is.
Well, that was the reason for the Riot Commission report.
Well, evidently it hasn't made any impact.
Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. What is Odoo? Well, Odoo is the only software your business will ever need. Featuring a suite of integrated business applications, Odoo connects your business operations together so you can get more done in less time. Odoo has apps for everything: CRM, accounting, sales, HR, inventory, marketing, manufacturing, you name it, Odoo's got it. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday.
Radiotopia.